Ladies and gentlemen, I might just ask everybody, if you could, to please mute your microphones and also to please turn off your video.
Anna Byrne.
Nothing.
Mute.
So was that clear to everybody? If I can please invite you all to turn off or to mute your microphones and to please turn off your video. We'll be beginning the webinar now. So a very good evening to everyone, and again, I'll ask if everybody could please mute their microphones, and if everybody could please turn off their video camera. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So a good evening to everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Laudato Si and community activism against environmental destruction. My name is John McGeady, Justice Officer for the Sisters of Our Lady of Apostles, and I'll be your host this evening. The event has been organised by the Joint Justice Committee of the Sisters of Our Lady of Apostles and the Society of African Missions. And on their behalf, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. As most of you know, Pope Francis published his seminal encyclical, Laudato Si, on care for our common home in May 2015, and has opened the eyes of so many to our relationship with our environment and the many burning injustices that scar our world. This evening, we will hear from 3 grassroots community activists who have taken a stand for their communities and their local environment in the face of damaging corporate interests. Fidelma O'Kane of Save Our Sperrins, Eddie Mitchell of Love Leitrim, Mary O'Leary of the Cork Harbour Alliance for a Safe Environment. We will also hear from Father Donal Dorr and Sr Majella McCarron on their readings of Laudato Si in this context. So a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and that it is being live streamed to our Facebook page. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the webinar. Again, if you could all please keep your microphone muted throughout the webinar. Please switch off your videos so that all panelists can remain visible on the screen. If everybody can turn off their video, that means the only people we'll see are the panelists. For the best experience, hide the non-video participants. The option should be visible at the top of your screen, and it toggles or switches between show and hide, and you want to choose hide. You also have the option of speaker and gallery view. It is advisable to use speaker view. That way the speaker will take up the center of the screen. Following our speakers, we'll have a Q&A. You can type your questions into the chat box and you can see the chat icon in your controls. The chat box will open to the right of your screen. Please preface your questions with the speaker's name so we know to whom they're addressed. You can post your questions as we go along, and we will attempt to have them answered at the end. But please also note that these options might not exactly be as they're shown on the slides on our screen here. It will vary depending on the device that you're using. However, all the options are available. So again, just to recap, we invite you all to please mute your microphone and to please turn off your video. Thank you very much. So our first speaker this evening is Father Donal Dorr. Donal is a well-known facilitator, consultant, trainer, theologian, author, and missionary priest, a member of St. Patrick's Missionary Society, better known as the Kiltegans. For many years, Donal devoted himself to working in Ireland and overseas with community groups, church groups, and teams of all kinds, with an emphasis on empowerment and community building. More recently, he has acted as a consultant, helping those in leadership or managerial roles to find more creative ways of working and to bridge the gap between management and a socially and ecologically sensitive spirituality. Donal's expertise relates to global issues such as international development economics, social justice, ecological sensitivity, overseas mission, interreligious dialogue, intercultural living, and creative leadership. Donal is the author of several books, including Spirituality and Justice, The Social Justice Agenda, Option for the Poor and for the Earth, and the Pope Francis Agenda. His most recent book, published this year, is A Creed for Today, Faith and Commitment for a New Earth Awareness. Donal, over to you.
Thank you, John, for this very heavy introduction. I think it's going to be quite difficult to live up to that, that long and rather heavy introduction, so I'll do the best I can. I was asked to talk about the contribution of Pope Francis, and particularly about how he relates to active community groups, like the three main groups that we have here from Cork, from the Sperrins, and from Leitrim. So I have to say it's a great privilege for me to be allowed to speak rather briefly. And for most of the time, I'm going to be sharing the screen so that you'll only see a small picture of me, I hope. And mostly I'll be putting up quotations from Pope Francis. So I'm hoping for the best now. And give me a moment just. So this, instead of starting with Laudato Si, I'm going to start with a speech that Pope Francis gave to activists like the activists that we have here tonight. And they had come from all over the world. And this was in October 2014, even before the Laudato Si came out. And I've put what I see as the important bits in red. He's really giving them a big support. He says, you have your feet in the mud. You carry the smell of your neighborhood, of your people, of your struggle. We want your voices to be heard, voices that are rarely heard. No doubt this is because your cries are bothersome. No doubt because people are afraid of the change that you seek. These are very strong words, encouraging directly the people like yourselves who are out there really struggling to save the environment. And then he went on, you're not satisfied with empty promises, with alibis or excuses. You get organized, you study, work, and you issue demands. And above all, you practice that very special solidarity that exists among all those who suffer. So the stressing here is on getting organized and making your demands and sticking together. Very, again, strong words. And then he goes on, he says how marvelous it is when we see peoples moving forward. And I put in red here, especially their young and their poorest members. Then one feels a promising breeze that revives hope for a better world. May this breeze become a cyclone of hope. This is my wish. Very poetic there at the end, and very encouraging to feel that the little breeze that you're creating could become a whole cyclone of hope. And then he goes on, moving towards a world of lasting peace and justice calls us to create new forms of participation that include people's movements like your own movement, and invigorate local, national, and international governing structures with that torrent of moral energy that springs from including the excluded in the building of a common destiny. And all this with a constructive spirit, without resentment and with love. It involves the establishment of a genuine solidarity, a torrent of moral energy. Very, very powerful. And he's talking about, changing the whole setup so that there's new forms of participation, and those who have been excluded like yourselves are the ones that will be important there. And now I'm going on to the encyclical itself. And all through the encyclical, there's a very strong condemnation by Pope Francis of a system that subordinates both people and the environment to the immediate and short-term economic advantage of a relatively small number of wealthy and powerful companies and individuals. And I'm sure that rings a bell for you. I don't have to push that any harder. That's what your own experience is, that you're being subordinated, and the environment is being subordinated to short-term economic advantage. And then this is in paragraph 206. He's suggesting that people on the ground can bring healthy pressure to bear on those who wield political, economic, and social power. And this is what consumer movements do by boycotting certain products. I'm from Mayo myself, where the word boycott was first used. And so I'm kind of delighted to see that Pope Francis is using this. And this is a way, one of the many ways that you can put pressure on people, on companies. And he says that these ways of doing it prove successful in changing the way businesses operate, forcing them to consider their environmental footprint. And then he goes on, he's talking about the importance of education, both of the general population, and he puts a special emphasis on the education of young people. And I'm sure that all of your groups are trying as much as possible to involve the young people, because they're the next generation. They're the people that will suffer most. And in paragraph 212, he says, environmental education has broadened its goals. Before this, it was just about giving facts, but now it includes a critique of the myths of unlimited progress, of competition, of consumerism, and of the unregulated market. So it's very strong. The whole present model of development is being strongly condemned by Pope Francis, as a lot of it is mythology, short-term advantages, and so on. And then in paragraph 213, he says, in the family, we first learn to respect the local ecosystem and care for all creatures. So that's why I would be, if I dared to say anything, and I'm sure you're doing this already, to bring younger members of the family along so that they will learn on the ground, so to speak, respect for the ecosystem and care for all creation. And of course, it's a two-way learning, because very often they may know more about it and may be more committed than the older people. And then in the paragraph 211, he says, there's a need to develop the kind of convictions and attitudes which help to protect the environment, the duty to care for creation through little daily actions. So it's by actually working in this way that the convictions and the attitudes are developed, not just by hearing facts. And the stress then on little daily actions. And he says, we must not think that these efforts, that's the efforts that we make, that they're not going to change the world. They benefit society, often unbeknown to us. So they may have very powerful effects, even though we may not see them. And it's a matter of real hope there. And then by his own example, he's a pope, and instead of living in the kind of high-flown style, having red slippers and all those kind of things that the people before him had, his own choice of a more simple lifestyle, traveling in the bus and in a small car instead of a big limousine. And by his admiration for the activists, especially this encouragement that I've been mentioning, Francis sets a model for all of us, and especially for activists like you, encouraging. He really wants to be one of you, as he was one of you before he became Pope. I'm nearly finished. I want to just say that he went on at the United Nations to say a very important truth from the point of view of Catholic teaching. He says it must be stated that a true right of the environment does exist. Before this, it was always held that rights were something that people had. But here he is saying there's a real right of the environment, that it really does exist. The environment deserves and has the right to be respected. And I think this is nearly my end now. He spoke again to activists about a year later, and this one was out in Latin America. And he says, I wish to join my voice to yours. He says, this system is by now intolerable. Our sister, Mother Earth, also finds it intolerable. It's lovely. He says, our sister, Mother Earth, calling her both our sister and our mother. I would say that the future of humanity is in great measure in your own hands. Now, he's not here talking to a general group, but to actually to groups of activists. The future of humanity is in great measure in your own hands through your ability to organize and to carry out creative alternatives. People and their movements are called to cry out, to mobilize, and to demand, peacefully but firmly, that appropriate and urgently needed measures be taken. To demand, to mobilize. I ask you, in the name of God, to defend Mother Earth. The future of humanity does not lie in the hands of great leaders, the great powers and the elites. It is fundamentally in the hands of peoples and in their ability to organize. And so I have made my little contribution, and I hope that you found it of some little help and some encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donal. Thank you very much for that insightful and very inspirational contribution. I'd like to ask everybody once again to please mute your microphones if you haven't already done so, and to please also turn off your video cameras if you haven't already done so. Thanks very much. We are having some technical difficulties, I'm afraid. It appears that despite being signed up for 300 participants on Zoom, the platform has stopped us allowing anybody in past 100. So unfortunately, there are some people who haven't been able to get in. There's very little we can do with it, unfortunately. We're very sorry about that. But hopefully, people will be able to join on Facebook, on the Facebook page where we're streaming live. Our next speaker is Mary O'Leary. And I know that Mary was having a little bit of difficulty joining us. I'm not sure if she's there or not. Mary, have you been able to link in? Okay, it seems unfortunate that Mary has not been able to link in with us. So we're just going to have to proceed to our next speaker. And our next speaker this evening is Fidelma O'Kane. Fidelma is the secretary of the Save Our Sperrins, an environmental interest group dedicated to good planning in the public interest in the heart of the Sperrins in County Tyrone, an area of outstanding natural beauty. Save Our Sperrins was formally set up in June of 2015 to campaign against a gold mine and processing plant proposed by Canadian mining company Dalradian Gold. A planning application was submitted in November 2017 and included a highly toxic cyanide leach processing plant in order to break down and extract gold. The mine would pose serious risks arising from the discharge of heavy metals, leaching, sulfuric acid, toxic dust, and fumes. Abstractions of volumes of water and pollution of both surface water and of the water table. Over 37,000 objections have been lodged with the planning department against Dalradian's application, A public inquiry will be held before a decision is made. However, many are worried that this may be compromised by Dalradian's ability to source favourable experts. In June 2019, 3 men in the campaign were informed by police of death threats against them. Nonetheless, Save Our Sperrins, along with the local people and other community groups, remain steadfast. Fidelma successfully took a judicial review against the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, which had granted Dalradian a discharge consent, allowing them to dump heavy metals into a river, which is classified as a special area of conservation. Fidelma is happily married to Cormac McAleer these past 40 years, and they have 4 adult sons and 3 grandchildren. She's a retired lecturer and a former social worker. Fidelma, over to you.
Thanks very much, John. I need to get himself to give me technical assistance. I've got it now. Screen, was he slideshow? Slideshow here, slideshow. Yeah. Okay, can you see it and can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, thanks very much, John, for that introduction, and it sounds grand. This is the beautiful area of the Sperrins, an area of outstanding natural beauty, as John said, and you can see just from the picture how nice it is. So we're campaigning to protect our water, air, land and health from the toxic pollution of gold mining. Okay, when I was asked to speak, I thought back over the past 5 years and thought when we set out, we had no clear plan except that we were campaigning against the gold mining. But looking back, I can sort of now list some of the challenges that faced us and some of them on an ongoing basis. So I list them. I have lots of pictures, you know, to illustrate the strategies we used and continue to use in our campaign. So just to have just maybe 2 or 3 with writing. So first of all, we had to learn a lot about gold mining because really we didn't know. We would have heard of it in other countries, mostly third world countries. And we did have an idea that it wasn't good, but we didn't know the details of it. So we had to inform ourselves, and then we had to set out then to inform other people. And then we had to try and motivate people to act on the information. And it was a big job in understanding the jargon of the company, the jargon of their consultants, the jargon of the government departments, etc. We had to learn how the system works, and that's, you know, how the company gets prospecting licenses and then applies for planning and all the different stages things go through. So again, that all took time. And through a big ongoing thing was keeping positive and keeping going. And that has been, you know, tough, but through help from other people, which I'll mention later, we've managed it. Dealing with the media was all new to us. It still is. The politicians, I can't say much about them. They were of no help to us. And I suppose it still shocks me how much people are influenced by money and greed and profit, and how people will look for their 30 pieces of silver. And again, overcoming the company propaganda is an ongoing struggle. They have employed 2 PR companies. And as I say, we're just ordinary people in a mountain area trying to defend our local area. Okay, the strategies we used over the last 5 years and continue to use, first of all, posters and leaflets. Posters to let people know that there was something going on in the area. Leaflets to give to people that they could take home with them and read in their own time. We've held about 50 public information meetings, and that's been not only through Tyrone, Derry, Antrim, Down, Armagh, Donegal. We've been in Monaghan, and we've been in Cavan, we've been down in Galway, and we've been in Dublin. So we're getting round the country rightly. networking has been excellent. That networking has helped us so much in terms of giving us strength and solidarity, both nationally and internationally. And it's not just with the same type of campaigns, but with other types of campaigns like pig factories and people protecting ancient oak lands, and the fracking, anti-fracking down in Leitrim, and the salmon farms and the poultry and all that. Like, we just find that people are coming up against the same problems, and we're sharing strategies, etc., etc. So we're part of a bigger movement. Letter writing. Well, I've never written as many letters in all my life, and I'm a retired person. Objections. Dalradian submitted a 10,000-page planning application, and we had to read that and then come up with objections, and that took a lot of time and energy and that, but we've succeeded in that line. Lobbying hasn't been too good. It's very hard to lobby people who've been bought. Social media has been excellent, especially Facebook. Save Our Sperrins has a Facebook page, and we have over 7,000 followers. The Twitter and WhatsApp and all the messenger, all these things which my generation would not have been used to, but we've had to take on board, and Zoom meetings like now, and this is my first time to share a presentation on Zoom, so that's a new thing. So all of that, it's been excellent, and excellent for making contacts and linking in with people and having solidarity. The local media, both newspapers, radio and TV, haven't been very helpful to us, because the gold mining company for the past 3 years pay weekly advertisements in our local newspapers. So he who pays the piper calls the tune. So the local papers don't like to hear from us. But having said that, today we had sort of a breakthrough in that there was an article in The Guardian today about gold mining. Then at lunchtime we were on BBC Radio 2 Jeremy Vine programme. And now tonight we're in this Zoom. So this has been, really good day. We've had lots of pickets and protests. And they have been actually quite good fun. I suppose it's, just having a bit of action is good. And we often say, where Dalradian goes, we go, because Dalradian have a habit of sponsoring events and giving out money and bribes. And we just try to set up pickets and protests at those. We sent 2 delegates over to Toronto to this PDAC conference, which was an international global mining conference. There was 20 to 25,000 delegates, and we sent 2 people over to find out what Dalradian were saying there and what was happening. We have small celebrations. The highlight has been one on the 4th of July 2018, when we had 2 Sioux Indians, Native American Indians, over from Standing Rock, the campaign against the oil pipeline. And it was really humbling to have them over and to tell us about what they have endured. And only very, very recently, in the last month, they have had success through the courts. In more recent times, we have had direct actions against the company. Nothing too startling. I don't think the Pope would look down on it. And I'll show you pictures. And then last year, because no politicians were helping us, we decided to stand a local person in the council elections as an independent anti-gold mining candidate. And he was the first one elected in County Tyrone, in mid-Tyrone. And it was great. It was a great boost to our campaign. And now he's able to hold the local council to account. But they aren't very respectful to him, because sometimes the switches make off. And then finally, judicial reviews. We've had 1 success so far, and I think we'll have a lot more in the future. So I'll move on. So most of it now is pictures just showing you leaflets we did over the last 5 years. Community meetings. This is just to give you an idea. We advertise, and then whenever we have community meetings, we do a presentation about the gold mining application. We have then a question time, and then we give out the leaflets to people, and we also, anyone who wants to sign an objection letter, we have hundreds with us, and we get them signed. And as I say, we've had maybe up in 50 open community meetings, And generally we find that Dalridians send a few spies along as well, but we shouldn't soon suss them out. Protests, that's one there at Dalridians compound. There's another one at the local council offices. There's more at Dalridians premises. And sometimes we dress up in yellow suits that an art group in Derry made for us. This is the direct action which has been in the past year and a half. The bottom right was Cormac, my husband. He chained himself to a borehole, a drilling rig, and stopped work for a day. And then the top left, that was just there recently on the 13th of July. 4 men got on the roof of the Dalridian compound and put up some banners and stayed up for 6 or 7 hours. Police were called and police said it was a civil action and no damage was done, and so there was no repercussions for the men. And then the bottom left was in the forefront, Dalridian staff were in a field and they were pegging it out. They were obviously going to do some exploration, but local men went into the field and stood around and stayed all day, and there were people brought them tea and sandwiches, and Dalridian staff weren't able to get on with their work. Back on the 3rd of February 2018, we got a phone call to say that there was a caravan on Dalridian site, and it was for the community. It was to be a focal point. And one wise man dabbed it the GPO, Greencastle People's Office, but with a nod to the GPO in Dublin as a sign of resistance. And you can see the headline there on the left-hand side in the local paper: protest camp digs in for the long haul. And we're now over 900 days there, and we'll have a big celebration at the 1,000 days. And on the right-hand side, okay, the first caravan nobody owns it as such. It belongs to the community, and it's a focal point for people to come, get a cup of tea, have a chat, learn about the gold mining campaign, sign an objection letter, give us solidarity. Okay, it was damaged in a storm, and then there was a second caravan brought on site, and that was with a celebration that day. And you can see in the picture on the right, there was a lot of people gathered for the opening of the second caravan. And I should tell you this, the local council last year, they served an enforcement notice and then an eviction notice on the 2 caravans. So then a 3rd caravan appeared up in the trees, because they said that if the caravan was touching the ground, it had to be evicted. So then a 3rd caravan is up in the trees now. So the council has taken no further action. I think they don't know what to do. I've said about networking nationally. There's in the top left, Monaghan and Cavan. On the top right, Galway. And the bottom left, the Green Party down at the Doyle. On the bottom right, a group from Donegal, Save the Hills of Donegal. And in the middle right, well, that's really both national and international, the Latin America Solidarity Centre in Dublin, because we met people there from Bolivia and from Colombia. Networking internationally, the top left, people from Peru who are also fighting a gold mining campaign. They sent us solidarity, we sent them solidarity. The middle left, they were American attorneys who came over and told us about rights of nature and rights of environment. Ties in with what Father Donal said, what the Pope said. Really, this will have to be our long-term aim, to assert rights of nature and rights of communities. Because while nature is seen as a commodity to be exploited, we will continue to have these corporate companies coming here to rape them and plunder them and take them with whatever the precious metals and minerals are, to take them away. So that's our long-term aim. The bottom left, that wee girl is Berta Cáceres' daughter. Berta Cáceres from Honduras was murdered 4 years ago there in March, and her daughter, because she was defending her land, again, she was an environmental defender, and her daughter was over courtesy of Trócaire, and we met her up in Belfast earlier this year and told her about our campaign. The bottom right, there's Cormac, my husband. He is a frontline defender, and he was at the conference in Dublin back in October, and he met hundreds of people from different countries, all fighting different campaigns. So that lady there is from Bahrain. And then on the top right, that wee girl was in Manchester at a climate strike, a school climate strike. And her name is Penny. And herself, I should say what her poster says in case you can't see it. It said, "The hills should be alive to the sound of music, not mining. SOS, Save Our Sperrins." So herself and her family had been over in the past year to visit us. And it was lovely to meet such a wee girl who has such interest in the environment. That's the celebration with Chas Jewett, the Native American Indian who came, and it was, as I say, it was humbling and it was uplifting at the same time. There's other celebrations there, and people love it. On the right-hand side, that was the day that the eviction was supposed to happen, last July the 17th, I think it was, but it didn't happen. So, but we had a party instead that day, and we love having parties. And then that was the two young people, Emmett and Sinead, who went over to Toronto in March 2018 to find out what the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada was all about. And surprise, surprise, they found the Irish government had a stand there, and Sean Keane, the minister, was over promoting Ireland open for business, inviting mining companies to come to Ireland, that there would be a lot of incentives for them. And we had our two people over. Dalradian did a presentation and they were able to ask questions, and the chief executive of Dalradian ran up the stage, and the two young people videoed it and recorded it, and it was a great coup for us. The bottom picture, Emmett and Sinead met with Mine Watch Canada, and they got them lots of access to media when they were over for the few days. So it was well worth the trip to Toronto. And could you just tell people, especially from the South, that in March 2019 and March 2020, Sean Kenny was the minister that went over to sell off Ireland open for business, open for mining, and they sell Ireland as a complete entity, which we would love. No border on their maps, and telling people come here. So that's how they came here in the first place. And then that's the election of Emmett McAleer in May 2019 as an independent anti-gold mining councillor. And as Father Donal said, important to get the children involved, and you can see the happiness on their faces when Emmett was elected. And then that was the judicial review on the 5th of November 2019, which I won in, after 23 months traipsing up to the High Court in Belfast, and the discharge consent was quashed. That was allowing Dalradian to put 9 heavy metals into the river that was a special area of conservation. I mentioned all the objections that we write and photocopy, numerous various samples. The good thing is that anyone, anywhere in the world, of any age, can submit an objection to this gold mining planning application. So I'd ask anyone who hasn't already done so to please go on Save Our Sperrins Facebook page, copy and paste an objection letter and email it to planning@infrastructureni.gov.uk. You have to add your name to it. As I say, anyone, any age, anywhere in the world can do that. And last Friday, there were 37,016 objections, and that is a colossal amount. We're a small rural area. So what lessons have we learned over the last 5 years? You probably think we're slow learners. But anyhow, I suppose democracy demands eternal vigilance. And I'm not 100% sure if it was Jefferson said that, but we have found we have to keep our eyes and ears open, whether it's the gold mining company or the politicians or the government agencies. And you have to watch them all the time. The system is corrupted. I suppose the good thing we have found out about people power, and our area, I suppose we think we're an indigenous people up in the Sperrin Mountains. The Irish was spoken here into the 1950s, and there would still, a lot of the phrases would still remain. Cooperation is our strength. And we feel that that is really important, and that we all work together for the good of our community and for the good of nature and for water and for air. And it hasn't been easy. It's hard to keep everybody on the same page, but I always say, if we can show respect to each other, listen to each other's point of view, but keep Dalradian, the gold mining company, Canadian gold mining company, as our focus, as our enemy, we will be able to live with our neighbours who at the moment support Dalradian. But once we have got rid of Dalradian, so I think that if we keep our focus on the gold mining company, that will be it. We have learned to appreciate and protect nature. I think until it came under threat, we didn't truly appreciate what the beautiful area we live in. But now we know, and I think it has been emphasised by the COVID pandemic as well, people getting out for walks and realising the value of nature. Again, we realise that it's not just our local wee struggle here in Tyrone and Derry. Dalradian have a lot of prospecting licences, over 122,000 hectares across counties Tyrone and Derry. And their chief executive said he's not talking about a single mine, he's talking about a mine camp. So but I have found out since there's over 540 prospecting licences given out in the Republic of Ireland. And so, I mean, we're all part of the one campaign, and it's not just, as Father Donal said, it's about protecting ourselves from these corporate industries where wealth is invested in a few people. So we've got to see how we can, I don't know, a revolution in the system. But anyhow, I think from the pandemic, we all appreciate that our health is our wealth and that money can't buy health. One of the other things we've learned is pace yourself for the long haul. I didn't think 5 years ago that we'd still be going, but now I know we will be going for a long time yet. And I think believing we can win, we will win. I think whenever you believe that what you're doing is right, it gives you the determination to keep going. And finally, celebrate. It's great for lifting morale, appreciating the local people and all the families who have helped us, and people throughout Ireland and throughout the world who have helped us. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that and celebrate it. And finally, I always like to end with this one here. This is a fella carrying his banner over to the gold mining compound, and it says, "No poisonous gold mining in the Sperrins, Dalradian out." And it reminds me always of a saying by John F. Kennedy, which is, "One person can make a difference and everyone should try." So thanks very much. I hope I haven't overrun my time too much.
Thank you very much, Fidelma. That's excellent. And really, thank you for sharing the experience of Save Our Sperrins. And I'm sure all agree that we wish you well in your continued struggle against the toxic gold mining. So just once again, unfortunately, for whatever reason, unfortunately, Zoom has stopped anybody else joining beyond the 100 participants who have already joined. And one of the unfortunate results of this has been that our speaker, Mary O'Leary, has been unable to join. So it's very unfortunate. But unfortunately, that's where we are. So all we can do is continue on and move on to our next speaker. And I'd like to welcome Eddie Mitchell. So Eddie is a Leitrim native and has been a leading member of Love Leitrim since it was set up in 2011. Love Leitrim successfully opposed the introduction of fracking in Ireland. Hydraulic fracking is a process of extracting oil and gas from shale rock. It involves digging deep underground before a high pressure water and chemical mixture is directed at the rock to release the gas inside. Fracking is the fossil fuel extraction process of last resort that requires thousands of wells, each injected with millions of gallons of toxic fluid. Fracking would have resulted in widespread industrialization of rural Leitrim, permanent environmental degradation, and severe damage to public health. Love Leitrim's approach has been one of positivity rather than negativity, to be for Leitrim and not simply against fracking. And I think that very clearly chimes with what Fidelma spoke about the need to celebrate. Love Leitrim's aim was to ban fracking in Ireland by creating public awareness, by lobbying decision makers, and by celebrating the positive aspects of Leitrim in Ireland. And they have thankfully succeeded in that. As a result of campaigning by Love Leitrim, the Petroleum and Other Minerals Development Bill, prohibition of onshore hydraulic fracturing, 2016, a private members bill introduced by Tony McLaughlin, TD, was passed into law in 2017. Eddie is now focused on stopping the importation of fracked liquid natural gas in Ireland. He is also working with community activists abroad towards a global ban on fracking. This group recently visited Satya Tripathi, UN Assistant Secretary General at the UN Environment Programme, and are focused on working with the Irish government to table a UN resolution calling for an international ban on fracking. Eddie, over to you.
Thanks, John. Hello everybody. Just to say that it's an honour to be here. It's difficult to follow Fidelma. We're coming from the same sort of background, but I think our campaigns are very similar. I just want to acknowledge Sister Majella. She's been giving us advice since the very start. She's always levelled us out and kept us on the right track. It really was important for us to be able to have a link right back to Nigeria, where Shell were involved there, and it gave us, it rooted us. And so Sister Majella has been causing trouble everywhere for years, so we know we can depend on her advice. I suppose the context where we started, and I have to go back a long way, back to 2011 now to remember that. So a company arrived in Leitrim and told us that they wanted to drill 9,000 wells in an area 280,000 acres. They did that without any government, without any political support. They just came and said, we've been asked by the Irish government to develop this area into a fracking region, and they were going to spend over 2 billion over the following 15 years. It was an enormous shock to our community. Their initial project area was to be 100,000 acres, split with 3,000 wells, split between Fermanagh and Leitrim. So what that meant for us when we looked at it was that over a 15-year period, anybody living in North Leitrim would be very close to being within a mile of up to 100 wells, and so that was a huge shock to a rural area, like no more than what you're facing in the Sperrins, Fidelma, where your area is going to be completely transformed. We were looking at the complete industrialisation of our rural community. And these are real projects, and they're happening all over the world. And it's very hard as a person who starts out in a community to realise the extent of what could happen. But we had to struggle with that. So I want to tell the story kind of from a community perspective. So initially, so you're talking about a large geographical area, spread over, at the time, possibly over 12 counties. So initially there was an attempt to try and organise everybody together, but that didn't work. That collapsed into a mess very quickly within the first couple of months. But out of that came small groups that established more geographically based. So we ended up, instead of having one large group, we ended up with 22 anti-fracking groups all over the proposed areas. So the group that I'm involved with, it was Love Leitrim. So we were focused in North Leitrim, close to where the initial project area was proposed. So we worked closely with people in Fermanagh. and focused on our own message, on our own work. So the group was being set up, and I'm a local farmer, so a young girl that Olivia was walking with her, she met, asked her to bring me in there because they wanted a farmer in the group, you know. And that's how it started. So what we realised in Leitrim was that I thought I knew my community. I was involved in farming, and I thought I knew my neighbours. But when I got involved in anti-fracking, I realised that there were loads of communities that I didn't know that I lived with. You know, so all of those communities, a range of diverse people, all came together in a movement against fracking, and I think that was our greatest strength, was the diversity that we had, and it meant that our activism became a place to thrive. So the Love Leitrim was really about getting people to do what they could. So we had meetings every 2 weeks. You'd know that there was going to be a meeting every second Thursday in Hamilton. So we often had maybe 30 people at those meetings. There were people doing research. There were people making posters. The people that ran the meetings were running them through community development rules. People were writing articles. People were making tea, running workshops. There was an awful lot of activity, and everybody just did what they could. There was no pressure on anybody to go beyond themselves or to burn themselves out. But it became a place where you could, I mean, in a way it was a huge opportunity for people that were living in what we thought was a quiet part of Ireland to get involved in a huge battle, you know, and to thrive, really, if it was possible. There was an opportunity either to burn out or to thrive. So eventually, people who were able to cope with the campaign and they did thrive, and we had about 30 people working all the time. So we had maybe 30 people working 20 or 30 hours a week, I'd say, in the first few years of the campaign. It was very extensive work. So I think it's important to say that when we started, the first thing that we faced was the choice that we had to make about what we were facing. So once we understood the extent of the battle that was ahead of us, at one point we decided we'd go to Rossport and meet the community down there. And they told us their story. They never advised us what to do, but they explained very simply what was ahead of us in terms of what we would have to do over they explained that this is going to be a 10-year campaign. This isn't going to be a simple thing to stop, you know. So we had to look closely at what was happening to them at that time. At that time, many of those people were being harassed by police. They were having to chain themselves under lorries. They were getting bet up, you know. So we had to make a decision to stand our ground and to fight for the next whatever it took. So that was a huge decision for people in Leitrim to decide to take on the state, to take on the apparatus that we faced, and just go into that unknown place. We didn't know whether we were going to win or lose, but we had to make a decision, and we knew that once we started to fight, that there was no way back. That we had to continue and to hold our ground. But so that was a moment in my life where I changed direction completely. And now I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have the support of my family and my wife and my kids. And that was the choice that we all faced, or many of us faced. So we decided that we'd stand and fight, and we had then to decide very quickly what we were fighting for. Were we trying to make this project better, or were we trying to stop this project? So we had to, and Fidelma raised it actually there. It was about rights and regulations, or our right to live in a safe place, or the right for this company to come in and be regulated and be managed, and for us maybe to do the best we could. So we decided that we'd say no. Now, our strategy was to hold on to the centre ground and to say, but when the decision came to be made, that we would say no. And that we wouldn't say yes, maybe, or that it'd be, if it was done right, it could be done. No, we decided to take control of our, and take responsibility for protecting our place and to exercise our right to say no. So we did that. We tried to do that in a positive way, as positive a way as we could. So we had, we focused on a vision for Leitrim. So we wanted to compare what was proposed by these companies and by our government against what our vision was for Leitrim. And, you know, in Leitrim we hadn't really done that before, but now we had to stand up for ourselves and start to look at our county and say, this is what we want for our county, and this is the alternative. And so we had an approach that was non-political. So we tried to bring our local politicians with us and get them to work on a regional basis. So to get them to go and work within their own parties and to work their way up, to win hearts and minds. So we focused, we didn't focus too much on the company, because the company was sort of using us as well. So they didn't mind us protesting so much in the early days, because they were trying to attract investors. A picture of them giving a talk with us protesting outside brought the media, it brought attention to their message. And their narrative was all about regulation and how to manage wells and how to do it right, you know. Whereas our focus was about what was happening in other communities, about the decision-making process, about, you know, what were the impacts on public health, what was going to happen when this was finished, where were we going to be. And what we found was that when we held our government to account, that was something that people could understand. When we talked about all the problems that could happen with a fracking well, people didn't understand what we were talking about. We had to learn a new language. So we realized quite quickly that we needed to talk about what we were concerned about. So we talked about the people in Pennsylvania that were getting sick. We brought people like Jessica Ernst over from Canada. Her wells had been fracked in her area, and she was able to explain the damage that was caused there, and she was suing the Canadian government. So she had a lot of knowledge. So in a way, we focused on corruption. So not corruption so much as in people getting money in paper bags, but we realized quite quickly that, you know, this company had turned up in 2011. We didn't know that they were coming. You know, there was a lot of secret policy, a lot of silent plans and secret policies. And what we realized was that if a government doesn't have a stated policy, it could start a project without proper assessment. So we looked for high-level assessments. We banned fracking in the county development plan. We did everything that we could to focus on what was wrong with the decision-making process. So this focus then on politics meant that people could talk about what we were dealing with. People understand corruption and people are interested in it. So, like for example, the government said, like, their idea of silent policy was to say, well, we're not sure if we're going to go ahead, you know, but we're going to do some research, and if it's safe, we won't go ahead. But in reality, when we looked at the decision-making process, the silent policy was to avoid high-level assessment, and the research was to develop regulations to go ahead. Now, that was hard to explain to people until the industry itself started to do the research. So we exposed the fact that even though the government had talked about public health concerns, there was nobody with any experience from public health doing research. It was the company that was doing the research on their website. They said that it was their objective to introduce fracking into Europe, you know. So we focused that on the politicians that were responsible, and through the Dáil committees. So the EPA came into a Dáil committee and they were questioned about the research that they were conducting. And it became quite clear that they were only considering one well, and that this one well was then going to decide whether the idea that if one well was safe, that thousands of wells must therefore be safe. So that the cumulative impacts didn't have to be considered. People understood that made no sense. So very quickly, the political support then started to crumble. But it took people like, we had to, so in the beginning we worked very hard to build local support, which we did. And Fidelma, I think you're at that situation now where you have very strong local support. But then we were faced with, okay, we have a few local TDs that support us and understand what we're talking about, but when we go to Dublin, nobody knows what fracking is and nobody understands our issues. So then we had to jump to the national stage. So in the way that happened was that people like Joan Collins and Claire Daly started. So we went to Dublin and we met these people, and they didn't know anything about fracking, but they said, look, sure, we'll do whatever we can. So we started to brief them, and then they started to talk about it in the Dáil, and they had no problem standing up and questioning Joe McHugh and people like that, and challenging them about, you know, the research and stuff. And once that started to happen, then politicians in the Dáil started to find out about fracking, understand, so the awareness levels built at the national level. And then at that point, Joe McHugh understood that he was standing on very thin ground, and he tried to pull the research. Now the companies refused to stop, but it is just an example of how we used politics to in a non-political way to look at the issues that we wanted to look at, rather than react to the companies. So we took control of the narrative, is what I'm trying to say. Now that took an awful lot of work, but in a way corruption helped us, because when we exposed corruption, we were able to win support. So injustice is something, if you can expose injustice, you can build support. So we then made another, I think what was a wise move, or a lucky move on our part, was that Fine Gael were in power then, and we had a local TD, Tony McLaughlin, who'd asked a lot of questions in the Dáil about fracking. And we, coming into an election in 2016, we asked all the candidates to pledge that they'd ban fracking if they got into government. Now you can imagine how difficult that was for a TD that was going to be in government. But Tony signed the pledge, and true to his word, after the election, we went to him and we said, would you bring forward a private member's bill, which was unheard of at the time. Usually if a government TD brings forward a private member's bill, it just gets shelved. But we were in a particularly funny situation with a minority government, that they were bringing in lots of new rules, and we realised that, and Tony realised that there was an opportunity there to get government support, because he didn't need Fine Gael support to put the legislation through. All he needed was the support of all the other parties in the Dáil. So Tony brought forward that bill, and because of that minority government that we had, we were able to push that through. And in the end, all parties in government supported us unanimously, because the awareness built, and they realised that too many people understood about the health impacts. New York had banned fracking, and we were lucky. It's amazing how it works. One day you're struggling, and then the next day it has happened and you've broken the back. Now it can take a long time to finish a campaign, but it's very, my memory of it is that you get a phone call one day And this is where our strategy earlier on was to hold the centre ground and then say no. We got a phone call and they offered us a moratorium for 5 years, and we said no. And then we said no to 10 years. And then they said, well, what the hell is it that you want? So we wrote the heads of a bill for them, and they agreed. And we were very lucky, you know. But when you go from a situation where you're working very hard and you're struggling, and then you can break the back, and then you're winning, and then you realise how powerful people are, you know. And I'd say, Fidelma, you're not far away from that point, hopefully, I think, you know. But immediately after we banned fracking, we realised that there was another threat. So now the threat is that they want to import frack gas into the Shannon Estuary. So for the last 3 years, the campaign has continued. Now the campaign has changed in that now the campaign against fracking was rooted very well in Leitrim. But the campaign against frack gas imports is much broader and more of a national campaign. So it has a lot of support in Clare, in Curry, in all the environmental groups in Dublin and around the country, and in Leitrim. So Leitrim is a place where if you mention fracking, people will ask you what it is. You know, they'll question you and they'll say, why did you bring that up? You know, we don't want that here. But so we have a great base here. It's a safe space for people who are against fracking. But so the campaign was rooted here, but now it has developed and found its feet at the national level. And now we have a very strong group of groups that are actively stopping frack gas imports. So we've had some success there now recently in that the government has agreed to develop a policy to stop frack gas imports. But we're in a crisis, as always. There's always a crisis. A company is just about to make a planning application, and if the government doesn't formalise its policy, that could actually bring down the next government. But there's a race on now to get that policy developed quickly. Now, so that's another positive campaign that we've achieved a lot there, and the campaign has grown. The reason that we've been successful at that level is because of groups like Fridays for Future, you know, the Climate Strikers, Extinction Rebellion. Like they came along last October and they got involved in our campaign, and it just exploded. We went from small number of active, committed people to thousands of followers now, and people understand now about frack gas imports. But our next step is, I think they thought that we'd go back and keep our heads down if they stopped trying to frack us. But obviously, if we allowed frack gas imports into Ireland, we would be very soon under threat again, because why would we send billions to America for frack gas if we had frack gas in Leitrim and Fermanagh? But so we can't ever stop. As long as there are people living in gas basins that are under pressure the way that we were, or the way that and that their health has been affected, we have to keep on fighting. So now we've joined up with communities in Pennsylvania and in Mexico and in Germany and around the world, and now we're pushing strongly for the UN to call for a global ban on fracking. And that's something that we hope that the Irish government are going to help us with in the near future. But even that isn't the end, because while we stopped fracking in Leitrim, Fermanagh is still exposed, and there are 2 licences for fracking in Northern Ireland right now. So we also have to help people in Northern Ireland to get a legislative ban on fracking, and that's also something that we're helping with in Northern Ireland. So it never stops. Once you start down this road, I think you get wired in a certain way, and you have to accept that then your life has changed and you become an activist. And like Sr Majella would be sort of part of the reason why I'm still an activist after we banned fracking, because she kept ringing and talking to me and saying, what are you going to do now? Or without pushing, you know. I think she's responsible for a few activists, but so we've learned that we have to continue. So we're also looking at other issues in Leitrim, like forestry and things like that, because there are other land grabs apart from fracking and the oil and gas industry. But it has been, we have thrived in Leitrim on banning fracking, because now we know, the people in Leitrim now know that they do have a say in their county, that we can exert ourselves and take ownership of our county, and we are responsible for how we live in the future. So that's very powerful, but it also adds huge responsibility. But that's my piece anyway. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Eddie, for sharing your story of Love Leitrim. And for the very clear struggle that was involved, and for the wonderful example of successful activism that clearly gives, you know, such hope to people. I'm delighted to say that Mary O'Leary has been able to join us. Some of our participants very graciously stepped out of the webinar in order to make space, and Mary has been able to join us. I know Mary had another appointment, so I'm not sure how long she can stay on for, but hopefully she'll be able to stay on and make her contribution. I'll just begin by saying a little bit about who Mary is. So she is the chairperson, Mary O'Leary is the chairperson of the Cork Harbour Alliance for a Safe Environment, otherwise known as Chase. And Chase is an alliance of groups campaigning since 2001 to stop the construction of a 100,000 tonne hazardous waste and a 140,000 tonne municipal incinerator in the Cork Harbour. Chase are represented at a local level by groups all across the Cork Harbour. On the 16th of January 2004, and Bord Pleanála, against the detailed advice of their own senior planning inspector, and despite the objections of over 23,000 people and the refusal of planning permission by Cork County Council, granted permission to the initial application for an incinerator. This was challenged in the court by Chase and eventually replaced with a new application in November 2008. This project was refused by Bord Pleanála in 2011. Since then, a third application for the incinerator was lodged in January 2016. Chase challenged the decision to grant planning in 2018 to the High Court and are presently awaiting a judgment. Chase have campaigned against the proposed incinerator by raising awareness, lobbying elected representatives, and making detailed, reasoned objections to the planning authority and oral hearing. Their work is funded by voluntary donations and fundraising activities. The message from Chase is simple: an incinerator in Cork Harbour is unnecessary, unsafe, and unacceptable. Mary is an environmental scientist by profession and has worked in that capacity within the community for the last 20 years. She previously worked as an environmental pollution officer with Longford County Council. She also ran her own oyster farm for several years in West Clare, and she is a recipient of the Lord Mayor's Award from Cove Town Council in recognition of the work carried out to protect the environment of Cork Harbour. So Mary, over to you.
Thanks, John. Apologies for all that confusion earlier, and I'm sorry to have missed the previous speakers because I heard the end of yours, Eddie. It was really interesting. I don't know if there was somebody else speaking before me, but I'm just sorry I've missed them because they all are obviously, as community people, we're all very interested in each other's campaigns. I'll just do briefly, I mean, John has given an outline of our campaign, and he really asked to speak in terms of our experience of community activism. Like Eddie, you know, a lot of us fall into activism kind of by chance or something we don't intend it to happen, but something strikes you as being wrong in your community and, you know, you have to stand up and be counted, and that's exactly how I sort of fell into We had just moved to Cove 20 years ago when the first application came in from Indover, Ireland, who are the company who want to build this incinerator. And, you know, I came down here for a new life, but I didn't expect it to be this one. So we're still fighting our campaign. Eddie, you've made fantastic strides in terms of stop banning fracking. Unfortunately, one of the reasons we're still fighting an incinerator is because it is still government policy. Despite years of lobbying and years of promises and years of everybody saying, oh yes, we'll ban it, and when we get in, we'll ban it, they don't, basically. So there is a slight desperation at the moment by some of the parties saying, oh, we still need one more incinerator in the country because we have a crisis. There's always a crisis, and the reason there is a crisis is because effectively over the last 15 years, the Irish government have done very little in terms of waste management. There's a lot of new and innovative waste management policies that could be adopted. Zero waste is a principle where we look at reducing our waste to zero. It's an aspiration. In reality, I suppose, I mean, we'll never get down to zero, but it's about reducing it to the minimal amount. And, you know, living, you know, it's also about, I suppose, not extracting raw materials. It's about, you know, we all live on one planet and we have a limited amount of resources. And that's always been Chas's stance, that incineration is not part of that principle. In terms of, we're now talking about a circular economy. The EU are very keen on this new circular economy, which, you know, on a finite planet makes sense. We only have so many resources. We've only got one planet, and if we keep on, you know, robbing from that planet, we're eventually going to exhaust it and pollute it, you know, on the other end. So I think, you know, no campaign would succeed, especially when it involves the people and the environment, without the community. We have had fantastic support here. In the beginning, it was difficult because in most campaigns, it's usually a handful of people who start a campaign because, you know, they're motivated by, you know, believing in something or thinking it's wrong. So at the beginning, we were a small group of people. We met here in Cove. There were 2 or 3 disparate groups around the harbour, and I called a meeting here in Cove one evening, and those groups came, and we amalgamated to form an umbrella group called Chase. We have probably about 10 or 14 communities around the harbour who each have their own subgroup, and they all send 2 representatives from each subgroup come to a Chase meeting. And that has been very successful over the years, because sometimes in a long campaign like ours has been, you can get despondent as people, you know, you think, oh, we're never going to win this. Yet when we come together as a big group, it kind of reinforces our will to keep on going. We boost each other up over the years. And then in 2016, Indover came with a 3rd application, and, you know, we've been fighting this for 16 years, and, you know, we do get tired, but at the same time, as Eddie said, once you get into this, it's very hard to drop the ball, and you just keep on going. And one of the issues for us is we have been through 3 High Court cases. We've been to the Supreme Court once, and we've been to Europe twice. And especially the Irish judicial system is very expensive. So again, when this time round, because waste management before was governed in each county, now the government have divided us into regions. So it's the region sets waste policy. When it was the county set waste policy, Cork County Council didn't have incineration as part of their waste policy, and that's why we actually did. It was refused the first 2 times because it wasn't actually part of our policy. Now that it's regional waste policy, it's drawn down from the National Spatial Strategy, and it has incineration in, and that's why we're still fighting it. But when Indover applied in 2016 and were granted permission, we knew that there were lots of grounds to challenge it, because it was a disgraceful oral hearing, first of all. Some of their evidence was falsified, which we were able to prove, because luckily we had a very good forensic analyst as one of our people. And there was one thing bugging him for a long time in terms of their figures, facts and figures, and we actually found out that the figures they had submitted as part of their planning application, part of the EIS, were actually figures belonging to another company that was up in County Meath, and the consultant company who were doing the work for them knew that the figures for that company worked and fitted into a coefficient that they had to pass. So they used those figures as part of Indaber's application. Yet, despite that, despite, Eddie, you were saying earlier that if you can show that there's corruption or that there's something wrong, that often it actually works. But in our case, even though we showed that these figures had been falsified, they still got planning permission, which we felt was outrageous. I mean, if you did that in a school exam or in your leaving cert or in university, you'd be kicked out of the university. But anyhow, they got the planning permission. But so we knew we had good grounds, not just those. We had 11 good grounds that we actually went forward to the High Court with, and the judge allowed all of the 11 points to be argued, basically. So we are still waiting for that decision. But going to court again was expensive, and we had no money left because we'd been to court so many times. And this time around, through social media, actually, which has totally changed the way we do business in terms of advertising and reaching out to people, the community just came in behind us, and the fundraising was incredible. And without the community, we couldn't have continued. So, I mean, the community helped in several ways. I mean, they helped give us encouragement. Organizing public meetings at the beginning were difficult. Trying to get people to go to public meetings is difficult. But when you get them there, they listen to the reasons why we shouldn't have incineration and that there are better alternatives. People want the best for their environment. They want the best for where they live. They want the best for their children. And I think over the years, we built our credibility as an organization. We always made sure that everything we said was cross-referenced. We never published anything or released anything without cross-referencing it, either with experts or with people who, in our own group, who were experts themselves in an area. And it was about building our credibility also with the media, because media, I suppose, were more important at the beginning, mainstream media. Now we have social media, so the whole ball game has changed to an extent, but you still have to establish your credibility as a campaign. And, that is helpful in terms of being honest in what you say, always being credible, and you will, bring your own people with you. Sorry, but that's the cat. The other thing we also found was, in the beginning, we didn't have all the support of county councillors. And what we learned in our campaign is you have to educate people. We assume our public representatives know about everything, but they don't really. And they're being lobbied by, these companies who want to build these things very, very heavily. And, sometimes they're busy people, they've lots of things to do. So we found that educating them was very important. And at every change, any new update, we would write to them, we'd inform them. If we got new information about different technologies, we'd send it to them. And by doing that, actually, eventually, the entire county council, was behind us in all of its planning issues. But the unfortunate thing with the Board Panola is they can overrule local democracy. And they can, obviously government policy overrules that as well. So we're still fighting our campaign. We are waiting for a decision from the courts. We're hopeful we'll win it. But the only thing that will stop it totally is the change in government policy. And, I must say, I congratulate Eddie. Fantastic that you have done so well. We probably need to go back to the drawing board and look at why we're not succeeding in the same way. But it is the only thing that will stop another application coming in, because these people are hungry. Incineration is a hugely profitable business. It's a dirty industry. And it really annoys me when I hear things like EcoEye, people on EcoEye, which is the environmental program in RTE, saying there's nothing coming out of that chimney except steam. I mean, if there was only steam coming out, incinerators wouldn't be regulated. So it's we're going to keep fighting it. Hopefully they won't get in with another application because the whole EU shift is away now from incineration. It's away from this, you know, we're looking at a circular economy. Incineration is part of a linear economy where, you know, you extract it, you use it, and you destroy it. And as we all know now, we're all aware of climate change and climate justice, and you know, those days should be over. And as we're restarting our economy, we're trying to encourage our government to restart it in a new way, you know, taking the environment and climate change into consideration seriously, not just lip service. So that's really where we're at. I wish you all well in your own campaigns, and if anybody has any questions, you know, feel free to ask, but that's probably as much as I need to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you very much for sticking with us and finally managing to get you logged in here. That was a really insightful contribution, and again, you know, similar to what Eddie mentioned, similar to what Fidelma mentioned, indeed similar to what Donal mentioned, that whole issue of corruption and of the fact that, as you said, our politicians don't know everything, and they're being heavily briefed and they're being heavily lobbied, and that needs to be balanced with the same from community groups. So thanks very much for speaking with us this evening, Mary. I'd just like to make a little note as well while we're here about those who are watching along on Facebook Live. As we explained, unfortunately, for whatever reason, Zoom have capped our attendance at 100 rather than the 300 that we are entitled to. However, so far between 90 and 100 people have logged in and are watching on Facebook Live. So for those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, thanks for sticking with us when you weren't able to get into the Zoom meeting. And if you didn't catch the beginning of it, you will be able to watch it on replay on Facebook Live. Okay, so our final speaker this evening is Sister Majella McCarron. Sister Majella is a native of Fermanagh and a missionary of the Sisters of Our Lady of Apostles, our own OLA sisters. Majella spent over 30 years on mission in Nigeria, where she met the environmental activist Ken Saro-Wiwa. She became involved in the efforts to save the lives of Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni Nine, a group of activists from the Ogoni region of Nigeria who opposed environmentally destructive practices by Royal Dutch Shell. The Ogoni Nine were executed by hanging in 1995 on trumped-up charges of murder based on testimony of witnesses who later recanted. Following her return to Ireland, Sister Majella has remained committed to human rights, especially the right to protest and activism against environmentally dangerous mining and mineral resource extraction. She worked as Justice Officer for the Irish Missionary Union. She served as Table Observer of the Shell to Sea campaign and the Garvahi Road conflict. More latterly, she has endeavoured to accompany the Love Leitrim and Save Our Sperrins community activist groups in their campaigns to resist destructive mining in their home places. So over to you, Sister Majella.
Thank you, and greetings to all my co-participants. It's lovely to see you in Cork, because that's not where I usually see you. So thank you. And to Donal for bringing us to Pope Francis, and I hope I will be going back to him again. Because when Pope Francis wrote his book, I like to use Caring for Our Common Home. That's a very rich title. And Laudato Si is a bit strange for me. It's another language, and I wonder why we put the title of a book into another language. But he says in the first page that he invites us all to enter dialogue on the future of the planet. That's quite something. But nearly every action that we've heard here is actually directed to talking about the planet. And I found myself more concerned with damage to the planet, damage to the earth. because that's what fracking is, it's what drilling is, it's what flaring is, and it's now what mining is. So it's dig, 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 and it doesn't matter how deep or what happens. As I said, I've been over 30 years. I was a teacher first, and then I came into this area of life through the Ogoni issue. And it began about 27 years ago, and then with different people here, I've been 10 years, 6 years, 4 years for Delma. And I just want to say that each of these groups, from the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people to the people here, there are websites still going on. And it's unbelievable to find that the Ogoni Mossop website is still active after 30 years. And that would go the same for Shell to Sea and for Love Leitrim and for Greencastle People's Office stroke Save Our Sperrins. You get to the point where you can't sleep unless you look at the website to see what happened today. It's quite a difficult journey. Now, in the literature that Father Donal talked about, he mentioned, I think at least twice or 3 times, that Francis used the word cry, that he responds to the cries of the people, and that he asks us to respond to the cries of the people. So one has to sharpen up one's ears, because my cry came to me through newspapers in all 4 cases. And it's not easy to go towards a cry because you don't know whether you're welcome or not. Do they know who you are or where you're coming from? For example, the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people, I had to knock on a door and go into office and say that I'm here to find out what it's all about. I also like the titles by which campaigns call themselves, because it's very spontaneous and it emerges. For example, that was the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people. And Francis would love all those words. He likes peoples, he likes them by name, Ogoni, he likes the idea of survival. And Donal himself then talked about the movement. So just without much deliberation, the community, the local people, they evolved the title of their movement. And the same thing in Mayo, Shell to Sea. They didn't spend many words on it, but you know exactly what's meant. This big multinational Shell, where do I want it to go? To sea. There has to be movement towards sea. So I am quite intrigued by that, the emergence of the title. In Leitrim, they had Love Leitrim, and believe you me, Pope Francis would like that a lot better even. Love Leitrim, because he's very fond of it, he's very affectionate towards the planet and towards the earth. And Love Leitrim is rather special for me because in the last year, 2 men students have completed their PhD thesis out of the experience of the Love Leitrim campaign. And that is really something. 1 thesis from Maynooth and 1 thesis from DCU. And in Tyrone, I responded to a newspaper event about a rosary being held on a hill. And I found myself there in the Sperrins above the village of Greencastle. Save Our Sperrins is such a rich title as well. It's our people, our place, and our fear for the future. And I've been looking at this today. Much more attention is being paid to the nature of the people-place bond. I remember when I began to go over to Erris first, Maura Harrington would keep on talking about the importance of place. Of course, I was a missionary and had left my place long ago, So it didn't strike me. And then in latter years, as I listened to other campaigners, the importance of their own place. It's now so important that there is a discipline called environmental psychology. And the key word here is, it's not, the key word is the bond between the people and the place. And the devastation of that bond is equally troublesome. It affects the psychology of the people who see somebody that doesn't belong there, a company that can come in and do what they like to the people. And as you pointed out, government that has hardly any control of it. So the psychological impact. So I was thinking about that when I was looking at how that community is held together. For example, in the Sperrins, the frying pan comes out on Sunday morning for a fry up in the caravans. So that is the symbol almost of the community up there. And it was the teapot in Mayo, and it was the kitchen table in Love Leitrim. You know, we think of funders and we think of registration of groups, and we think of NGOs. None of these groups are any of those things. They're complete emergences from a landscape and from a people. And a lot of what Pope Francis writes about in his work is about that. It's about the bond. Psychological wholeness is surely part of environmental protection. And it must stretch to cover the child and the elder. Home is a very potent reality. So those four groups, and I add Francis to it, because what did he call his document? Care for our common home. Now, who am I in all of this? Because there are many people like me who help campaigns, work alongside campaigns. I'm not a member of any of your groups. I'm not a resident. I don't own house or land. I have no forebears in any of these places. But I'm a responder, a visitor, a witness, a proclaimer when danger is spoken about the people and places away from my own people and place. So important for those of us who are not in that campaign constituency. Who are those who help? I think Mary O'Leary would have spoken it when she said how many people helped them in their campaign. So we are mainly the witnesses and proclaimers. And I enjoyed finding out something about Pope Francis, because, you know, that's all he is, a proclaimer and a witness, because he is not currently rooted in a place. But he decided he would take a hand at practice, because something in the title of this is about theory and practice. And even though he was made a Pope in 2013, in 2014, he decided to have a special synod focused on a special place. So here again is the idea of the place. And it's Amazonia. His country, Argentina, is next door, but is not part of that. 33 million people in Amazonia. And his eye was not so much on the 33 million, but on the 3 million indigenous people in hundreds of small groups that have been impoverished over 400 years by colonialism. That's, their homes have been taken away, their water, their wood. Think of all the things that are taken away when big groups of business companies come in. Even today, there's an article in the Irish Times, page 7, about the situation in Brazil with their leader, who allows companies to just come and log and log and log. And he decided to go and see them. I like that. He also went to see as I went to see. So it would give people courage to go and see. And he says, I wanted to come and visit you and listen to you, to be together with you in the heart of the church, unite with your challenges in defense of life, in defense of earth, and in the defense of all cultures. He never forgets about the person in the culture, that is part of one side of the bond. Now, he sent out about 200 invitations to people that he chose to come to that special synod, that special meeting. And he decided that he would get groups to prepare well in advance. So there are about 45 assemblies all through the place, Amazonia. And then he invited their representatives to come to have what we would call a social analysis, and what the Jesuits would call a discernment, and what we would call a consultation with a very big agenda. But do you know what? It was too wide, too big, and it gives us courage because it ended in frustration, it ended in confusion, and it even mentions there was a lot of fury in the place. So that is campaign work. That is the splits. That is the fears that I have experienced. And I'm thanking God Pope Francis has now experienced it. He mightn't have known that when he was writing Laudato Si. And yet he has such a passion for the indigenous people of the Amazons. And he welcomed many different people to his place. And I'm hoping that we can show you a photograph of one of the people that he welcomed just 6 months before the synod. This is Pope Francis, welcome Chief Rainai from Brazil, who came to appeal to him as we go to our people in government and all the rest of it, because we do have to go to those who have power and also to those who can speak for us. And I think this photograph is very special because you will notice the malformation of the lower lip. Chief Rainai doesn't think that's a malformation. He made a commitment to serve his people when he was age 15, and in his indigenous community, the extension of the lower lip is the physical sign of that commitment to serve his people. And he now is 90 years old. So that is the photograph that I would look with you. He then wrote a document just as he was leaving the synod with lots of problems unsolved and a campaign for Amazonia that has to continue. And you know what he called the document? Beloved Amazonia. So Love Leitrim, you're in good places. Beloved Amazonia, Love Leitrim, this strength of the bond between people and place. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Majella, and for a really insightful contribution. And really thanks for, for drawing together your own experience, the words of Pope Francis and the experiences of our speakers here this evening as well. We'll now turn to our Q&A. People are invited to submit questions in the chat box. You'll find the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and if you click it, the chat icon, it'll open a box on the right of your screen and you can submit questions. We'll now turn to Mr. Jerry Ford, the Justice Officer for the Society of African Missions. Jerry has been tracking your questions as they've been flowing in on the chat box, and he'll continue to track questions as they come in. So please don't hesitate but to pose them. If you have a burning question, send it in. And then Jerry will invite our speakers to respond to some of your queries. We are coming up to 9 p.m. We can probably go overtime ever so slightly. Over to you, Jerry.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I hope you can see me. I've been tracking the questions, but before going on to the questions, I must say there is a huge number of comments of support and encouragement for all the people, our speakers this evening, and it's amazing to look at them all. And if you can see them, please have a read of them. We have a few questions, and maybe they can be answered by a number of people. One of the first one is, how can marginalized, helpless communities, and then in developing countries, confront superior propaganda of oil companies? And maybe that was a question that was submitted to Father Donal, and if he could answer, and maybe some of the others as well.
Thank you, Jerry. I think this is a kind of a question that the actual people on the ground are in a much better position. This isn't a question of theory, but what I have heard from them, one of the things, for instance, that Mary said, we're now in a new era, the era of social media. So there can be a lot done at that actual level. The little bits that I would add is that it's a lot about building alliances. And I was thinking of this particularly when I was thinking about the Sperrins, because as I mentioned before, I'm from Mayo, and we had a big campaign, I would say 20 years ago now, about the time they were going to mine Crowpatrick, the sacred mountain, for gold. And they had already drilled into the mountain, and there was outrage. But the main point that I noticed at that time was that there was an alliance of very different groups. On the one hand, there were environmentalists, but secondly, and there was great emphasis on this in the inputs we've had, about the local communities, local farmers and so on, so that it wasn't just a kind of environmentalists who can be seen as an elite. And the interesting thing in Mayo was that they were able to link up with deeply religious people who saw this mountain as a sacred place. And I think that the same applies, maybe not quite as obviously in religious, but the Sperrins is a sacred place. Leitrim is a sacred place. Cork Harbour is a sacred place. And all of these places are sacred. So to build an alliance is very important. And certainly the experience of the Leitrim people that it can actually work, and very good strategy. Majella was emphasizing the importance of strategy, but we saw it actually in practice when in the Leitrim case, when they were working first with their local people, their local PDs, and then eventually they had to go to the national level, and now they're at an international level. The only other thing I would add was that there was an article already in The Guardian, I think today, about the Sperrin situation. And one of the things that really struck me was that there's a whole area that reaches across from the Sperrins over to Scotland. And so linking up, not just with international groups, but more specifically, in their case, with the Scottish group would be very important because they all are local groups linking together. But I think I should leave the rest of the time to respond to the people on the ground, how best you can respond to these powerful agencies.
Would any of you, Eddie, would you like to make a comment? Yeah. Yeah, Eddie, go ahead.
Okay, so the question that I remember there is about how do indigenous communities in developing countries, how did they take on these corporations? And I would say that that must be very difficult for people. But I think that what we did was we managed to take control over the narrative. We decided what was going to be on the agenda, and we got past reacting to the companies. But we did that. We were lucky that we had a form of democracy. And one of the things that our campaign has shown is the difference between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. In that in the north, and this is why the company wanted to start fracking in Fermanagh. So they wanted to use the division that was in the community in the north. They wanted to use polarization, sectarian politics, so that in Northern Ireland we find that people vote either for one flag or another. So it's very hard for activists to become relevant in terms of politics in Northern Ireland, because they're being ignored by political parties who know that all they have to do is maintain division in order to stay in power. So that's a huge problem. So I think the quality of your democracy is so important. What has to happen in the north, and this is what Fidelma has had to do, is that they've had to put their own people into positions. They've had to go after power. Whereas we were able to use our politicians and educate them and get them to work for us. In the north, it seems that we have to fix the problem of democracy in the north in order to be able to win campaigns, you know.
Okay.
So it's difficult for people. It depends on how they can, what their democracy is like and how they can manage within it, you know.
Thank you. Fidelma or Mary, would you like to add your comments?
Yes. Well, just I suppose what, I agree with what has been said already by Donal and Eddie. I think, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I think that it's very difficult. I mean, people said to us at the beginning, it's David and Goliath, because they see these companies, coming in with a lot of money, and who are we, ordinary people trying to oppose them. So I appreciate it's very difficult, but I think it's people coming together, get strength and solidarity. So as Donal talked about forming alliances, but I think first of all, getting the local people together, and each group, I think, has to decide on their own strategy. It is very difficult. I sort of feel, who are we to tell others? But just what worked for us was getting people on board, education and information, and then moving forward, with the objections. That was acceptable. And I mean, at the beginning, people would have been very against any direct action, but now people have got bolder and now feel stronger in their position to oppose the company. Networking is really important.
Thank you very much for that. Barry, do you want to add any comment? No, you're okay? Okay. Maybe move on to a second question, which is quite related to the first one. And it begins by saying, poor people are usually struggling to make ends meet. When a company come to mine or extract oil, gas, people are promised jobs and so much more that many a time turn out to be empty promises. How can they be motivated to see beyond the promise and stand up to protect the land and the water? And the person here says, I have saw huge destruction in one country in East Africa. Again, anybody like to take that? I mean, it was directed at Father Donal, but it's open to all. Yeah, Donal. Donal, we can't hear you. You're muted. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I'll just say very briefly that this is a situation where what Pope Francis is saying about the importance of getting the youth involved is a key part of it. Because if you ask a local community, do you want your children to have a local area and a whole planet that is utterly destroyed? They're unlikely to say yes. So there's a question of immediate short-term advantage for local people, or at the price of making their children and their grandchildren pay the price. I'll just leave it at that because other people may want to come in.
Okay, I know Mary wanted to come in a while ago. It's been notified to me, but you were muted. So if you want to come in on again.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, what I was going to say earlier is that in the last question is that there's an awful lot of knowledge and wisdom in communities, and people can use that wisdom and knowledge to, you know, it gives you strength, and it also gives you a certain power that governance hasn't really well, up to now, governance and our government haven't been challenged with, I suppose, and we found that in our campaign, that we gathered information, we educated ourselves, we gained knowledge, and that gave us a certain power. And I think even in terms of the question there about resisting the offer of jobs, you know, in communities that are compromised. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
I think, again, education and knowledge are very important. If everybody has the same knowledge, you can undermine the spin and the rhetoric of the corporate companies. And by educating the people in terms of what is being proposed, and maybe showing them better alternatives, looking at how they can actually make a better life in their community by maybe developing some other aspect of their community, and show them that there's a better alternative where they can create some other type of jobs, you know, and so I think education and knowledge are very important in all campaigns, really.
Okay. And do any of the other speakers want to say anything about the idea of motivating people beyond the promises? Yeah, Eddie? Okay, come in.
No,
yeah.
Majella. I just remember doing a little article on leadership in a community. We should look at where there are leaders not in government circles. Where are the other leaders? And Pope Francis is an ideal leader that is not in the political circle. And church leaders have knowledge and ability, but they're very silent. And I was very impressed when I read about the church leaders in El Salvador, that in fact, they got together but a 10-year campaign and made El Salvador the only country metal-free mining. And they did it on one point, that the particular bishop who took charge of that was a scientist, and he understood the language of the companies and of the governments. So he argued not on the Bible, but on scientific knowledge. So it might be that groups that can educate people in this kind of campaign and struggle, but with the proper knowledge where they can argue a point. So where are the leaders in our communities who are not in government?
Okay, thank you for that. Fidelma, I thought I saw you trying to come in there.
Yes, but I suppose Majella's point is good as well. I think that, I mean, I just following on Majella's, I was just going to say that I did speak to a priest about it that I thought would have known, would have known better. And he told me he was no Oscar Romero, or was it the bishop that was murdered?
Yes. Sir.
And he says, I want to live. So he wasn't prepared to speak out. And I said, I thought the Pope was your boss and that the Pope had the Laudato Si encyclical. And he laughed. He told me, away on with you. So, that is annoying. But I mean, that going back to the earlier question, I suppose, I think that the whole thing of, it's just going out of my head now, oh yeah, about jobs and that is put to us. So every day people are saying to us, you know, you're stopping jobs, that there will be jobs. And we say, okay, short-term gain for long-term destruction. And they don't count into the equation the jobs that will be lost in agriculture, in fishing, and in tourism. And our area would like sustainable jobs, not short-term. And there's no history of mining here. So the miners, they won't be local people employed as miners. They'll be flowing in and flowing out like what happens in all mining, you know, projects in the world. So it's, you know, I think it's a very false statement that the company makes about all the jobs they're creating. And also the wealth, the money, it's going to be going to the stakeholders and the shareholders and all the, you know, it'll not be the local people, you know. So, I mean, I think that it's very misleading, the information that's given out.
Okay, thank you for that. Eddie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I think it's important to develop local expertise, because there's a link between local expertise, and if you get time, people can develop expertise. And over time, communities end up with expertise that can stand up to permanent civil servants, you know, because we're after a few years, we end up knowing what we're about. But also, the reason that local expertise is so important is because people, if they know you, then they know your uncle, they know where you come from, they know whether you're half mad, they know they can get so much from you, they know how serious you are and how committed you are. So local expertise is very important for communities to build, and not to be relying too much on consultants. And when communities develop their expertise, then that serves them well, and it becomes part of their ongoing fight. You know, they've got resilience when they develop local expertise.
Okay, thank you for that. There's another question that's come in. It's for you, Eddie, as well. And it says, can Eddie let us know about the current campaign and petition from Friends of the Earth Ireland, asking that the Irish government turn their promise in the programme for government to oppose LNG imports into a real policy?
Yes, that's coming from Dervla, and I'd appreciate if people would click on that to see that, because right now we need people to shout very loudly at the government so that they will formalise this policy that they had in the programme for government. So if people could click on that link and do some work for us and share that, that would be brilliant. Dervla is the engine in Love Leitrim. She's making sure that people hear our message. Thanks, Dervla.
And is there a sort of a petition to sign, or is there sort of... There is. Okay. Okay, I think we're nearly coming to the end of our question time. So I'll hand back now to John, and maybe he will sort of bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much for everyone. Thank you for your questions. And if there's any other questions that are put in, even at this late stage, we will try and address them, and we will put sort of the answers we come up with on the SMA and the OLA website. And just to remind you also that anybody who looks for more information about the groups participating, you know, they themselves, information can be found online, either on their websites or on their web pages. So thank you very much. So over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Jerry. That really wraps up our event this evening. I want to just again apologise to all of those who were supposed to be tuned in and who weren't able to, and I want to thank them for sticking with us and tuning in on Facebook Live. Again, for anybody following along on Facebook Live who came in late, you'll be able to watch that on replay. So if you missed the beginning, you'll be able to catch up on it. I hope that you've all found it informative and inspiring, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. It only leaves it for me to thank our contributors for taking the time and the effort to speak to us. Donal Dorr, Fidelma O'Kane, Eddie Mitchell, Mary O'Leary, and Majella McCarron. I'd ask you again, please, to look into their campaigns, to provide them with support. You know, Save Our Sperrins is still ongoing, and they need your support. The Cork Alliance, the Cork Harbour Alliance for a Safe Environment, their campaign is ongoing, and they need your support. And as Eddie just mentioned, there needs to be pressure placed on this newly formed government to implement the policy that they promised in Ireland to put an end to any possibility of liquid natural gas being imported into the country. So again, to all our speakers, thank you all for sharing your stories and your insightful contributions. And please do keep up the great work and remain committed as you have done. And we'd ask all of our viewers, the 100 or so people who joined us on Zoom, and the 100 or so people who are watching on Facebook Live, to also get involved and provide support. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much, and good night, and God bless.